Flor Ramos Contemplacion was a Filipina domestic worker executed in Singapore for murder. Her execution severely strained relations between Singapore and the Philippines and caused many Filipinos to vent their frustrations over the plight of overseas Filipino workers towards both states' governments. Flor Contemplacion, March 17, 1995, Singapore, was a Filipino domestic worker convicted of murdering another Filipino domestic worker, 34-year-old Dela Mega, and Nicholas Huang, the 4-year-old son of Mega's employer. The murders took place in May 1991, and she was found guilty and sentenced to death in January 1993. Nicholas's parents discovered the bodies of Mega and Nicholas in their flat at Gangsa Road on May 4, 1991 when they returned home from work that afternoon. As no one had appeared to greet them, they began searching the house and found their 22-month-old daughter crying in Mega's room. Then, they found their son lying on the floor of the bathroom in the kitchen with his head in a pail of water, and Mega lying next to him with an elastic cord around her neck. The boy had drowned and Mega had been strangled. Suspecting that the culprit could be Mega's friend, the police decided to question Contemplacion, as her name and address were written in the dead woman's diary. After interrogating Contemplacion and checking her alibi, which turned out to be false, the police arrested her on May 5, 1991. 2 days later, she was charged for the two murders. Mega, who was scheduled to return to the Philippines on May 5, 1991, had agreed to help her deliver a parcel to her parents in the Philippines. On the morning of May 4th, she went to Mega's flat to hand her the parcel. When Mega was in the kitchen doing some work, Contemplacion used an elastic cord to strangle her from behind. After Mega collapsed, she dragged the body to the attached bathroom, where she saw Nicholas playing with water in a pail. She stood behind him, held him by his upper arms, and pushed his head into the pail. She let go when the boy became motionless. She then took some items that Mega was planning to take back to the Philippines and left the flat. Contemplacion's trial in the High Court commenced on January 26, 1993. On the third day, she claimed that her statements to the police had been obtained under duress, but the judge dismissed the allegation. The next day, she chose to remain silent when her defense was called as the hearing drew to a close. The judge then found her guilty as charged and sentenced her to death. She subsequently filed 2 appeals but failed to have the sentence reduced. Her execution was set for March 17, 1995. Contemplacion was hanged at dawn on March 17, 1995 at the Changi Women's Prison and Drug Rehabilitation Center despite a personal plea for clemency to the Singaporean government from President Fidel Ramos. Although President Ramos seemed initially resigned to the execution, he called Contemplacion a heroine. His wife, First Lady Amelita Ramos, went to receive Contemplacion's coffin at the Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila on March 19. Contemplacion's body was carried from the airport to San Pablo, and thousands of Filipinos lined the route. President Ramos sent a wreath to Contemplacion's wake and offered financial assistance to Contemplacion's 4 children, who were dependent on their mother's income as a domestic worker, pledging 1 month of his salary to a scholarship fund. When Contemplacion and Mega's bodies were repatriated to the Philippines, autopsies revealed that Mega had a fractured skull and her throat was almost crushed due to the force inflicted in it. Further investigations revealed that a typical woman would not have been able to exert that much force. Many Filipinos believe that Contemplacion was innocent or at least insane, blaming the Singaporean government for a lack of compassion and the Philippine government for not doing enough to stop the execution. The Philippine embassy in Singapore in particular was criticized since it did not even have a consular representative as an observer in court throughout the trial. The Philippine Secretaries of Foreign Affairs, Roberto Romulo, and of Labor and Employment, Nieves Confessor, both resigned as a result of the controversy. Bilateral relations between Singapore and the Philippines soured for several years after the execution. President Ramos recalled the Filipino ambassador to Singapore, and many bilateral exchanges between the countries were canceled.